What's one moment in your life that changed everything in your family?
I never thought a hospital waiting room could feel so much like a graveyard, all those empty chairs staring back at me like ghosts of the family that wasn't there. But that's exactly where I found myself on that crisp October morning in Cleveland. My hands clasped tight around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, the bitter taste mirroring the knot in my stomach as I waited for news on my 12-year-old son, Timmy. He'd been doubled over in agony the night before, his appendix bursting like some cruel surprise party no one wanted, and the ambulance ride had been a blur of sirens and paramedics barking questions I could barely answer through the panic rising in my throat. By the time they wheeled him into the operating room, his small hand slipping from mine as the doors swung shut, I was alone in that fluorescent-lit limbo. The kind of place where time stretches thin and every unanswered ring of my phone felt like another betrayal stacking up. I'd made the calls. Right away, of course, first to my mom, Eleanor, who lived just 20 minutes away in that same suburb we'd all grown up scraping by in, her voice groggy from whatever late-night TV she'd been glued to, promising she'd be there soon as she could. Then Lisa, my younger sister by 5 years, the golden child with her perfect hair and endless schemes, who sighed dramatically about being in the middle of a work call, but swore she'd wrap it up and head over. Even my brother Mark, out in Pennsylvania for his trucking job, got the frantic voicemail, because surely, in a crisis like this, blood would thicken and they'd all drop everything for Timmy. The nephew they cooed over at holidays with photos on their phones, but never quite followed through on visits. Hours ticked by, the waiting room filling with other families, moms hugging kids, dads pacing with cell phones pressed to ears, a collective hum of support that made my isolation sting sharper, like salt in a fresh cut. No one showed. Not a single Jenkins face pushed through those double doors, no hurried apologies or offers to hold my hand while the surgeon did his work. I texted updates to myself just to feel like someone cared, scrolling through old family group chats filled with birthday memes and Lisa's vacation selfies, wondering how we'd devolved into this, where a kid's life on the line ranked below whatever drama or laziness kept them home. The doctor finally emerged around noon, his mask dangling from one ear, face unreadable at first until he nodded and said Timmy was out of surgery, appendix removed, no complications, but he'd need to stay a few days for monitoring. Relief washed over me like a wave, but it crashed hard against the anger bubbling underneath, because as I followed him to recovery to see my boy hooked up to IVs with his eyes fluttering open, all I could think was how he'd whispered for Grandma earlier. His voice so small, and now I'd have to explain why she wasn't there, why none of them were. We settled into the routine over the next couple days, me sleeping in the recliner, fetching Jell-O that Timmy poked at with a spoon, chatting about school and his soccer dreams to keep his spirits up while I hid the exhaustion carving lines under my eyes from the double shifts at my accounting firm that barely paid the bills since the divorce 3 years back. It was a fragile normalcy, punctuated by nurses' checks and the beep of monitors, but on the third day, as Timmy started sitting up and cracking jokes about the hospital gown making him look like a superhero in reverse, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom that shattered it all. Not, "How's Timmy?" or "I'm so sorry I couldn't make it," but a blunt demand. "Lisa needs $10,000 for her wedding dress. Designer issue. Wire it today." I read it twice, heat flooding my face as I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles whitened, because after ditching us in our hour of need, now they expected me to fund Lisa's bridal fantasy like I was the family piggy bank, ignoring the fact that my savings were earmarked for Timmy's braces and our leaky roof back home. Lisa's wedding was months away, some lavish affair she'd been planning since her engagement to that salesman who seemed more flash than substance, and Mom had always babied her, footing bills for dance classes and proms while I got hand-me-downs and lectures on pulling my weight. But this was a new low, treating my boys near death like background noise to their priorities. I paced the hospital corridor, heart pounding with a mix of fury and disbelief, glancing back at Timmy coloring a get-well card for himself, innocent in all this mess. No way was I letting them slide. With a deep breath, I pulled up my banking app, the one tied to the old shared family account Mom had set up after Dad died to keep us connected, and transferred exactly $1, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I typed the memo, by some guilt. Hitting send felt like flipping a switch, a petty spark of revenge that made me smirk despite the tears pricking my eyes, imagining Mom's confusion turning to outrage when the notification hit her screen. Almost immediately, my phone lit up with her call, the ringtone echoing down the hall like a warning shot, and as I watched it vibrate in my hand, I wondered if this was the start of something unraveling us for good, or just the push I needed to finally stand alone without looking back. That incoming call from Mom lit up my phone screen like a flare in the dim hospital room, her name flashing over and over while Timmy dozed peacefully under the thin blanket, oblivious to the family fireworks about to explode on my end. And I let it ring out twice more before swiping to answer, steeling myself for the tirade I knew was coming after that $1 jab I'd just fired off like a poorly aimed dart at a board full of excuses. Her voice hit me first, sharp and indignant as a slammed door, demanding to know what in the world I thought I was doing sending pocket change with a snide note about guilt when Lisa's wedding preparations were in dire straits and everyone knew I had a little tucked away from those overtime hours at the firm. As if my savings were communal property she'd helped build instead of the result of me scraping by since the divorce left me footing everything for Timmy and our modest two-bedroom rental. That always seemed one repair away from falling apart. I kept my tone even, almost casual, leaning against the windowsill with the afternoon sun slanting through the blinds and casting stripes across the linoleum floor, explaining that if showing up for a grandson's surgery was too much to ask, then funding a sister's vanity project was off the table entirely, and besides, maybe that dollar could buy her a clue about priorities in this family where I'd always been the one holding the fort while she played referee to Lisa's endless whims and marks. Half-hearted check-ins. She sputtered then, launching into a litany of how ungrateful I was after all the sacrifices she'd made raising us three on a widow's pension following Dad's heart attack a decade back, conveniently glossing over the times I'd wired her money for utilities or driven Lisa to auditions when Mom's car was in the shop. But I cut her off gently yet firmly, saying that real family bonds weren't measured in dollars but in presence. And since she'd chosen absence during Timmy's ordeal, perhaps it was time we all learned to stand on our own feet without leaning on shared illusions of support. Hanging up left a hollow echo in the room, mixed with a flicker of guilty pleasure at having stood my ground for once without crumbling under her guilt trips. And as I settled back into the recliner with a sigh that carried the weight of unspoken resentments built up over years of being the reliable one in a lineup of flakes, my mind wandered to the old shared bank account she'd set up right after Dad passed, ostensibly for emergencies like college funds or medical bills, but more often drained for her impulse buys at the outlet mall or Lisa's weekend getaways with friends who seemed to vanish when real trouble called. The more I thought about it, the more it irked me that I'd let those balances linger accessible, a digital safety net I'd contributed to faithfully while they treated it like an open bar. So with Timmy still napping and the nurse's rounds not due for another hour, I pulled out my laptop from the bag at my feet and logged into the online portal, my fingers hesitating only a moment before navigating to the security settings and initiating the freeze on every linked account. A simple click that locked out transfers and withdrawals with a confirmation email pinging almost immediately to seal the deal. It felt audacious, like sneaking an extra cookie from the jar as a kid, but on a scale that could ripple through their lives in ways I wasn't sure I wanted to imagine. Yet the satisfaction outweighed the twinge of doubt, especially when I pictured Lisa's face crumpling upon discovering her credit card declined at the bridal boutique, where she'd no doubt be trying on gowns that cost more than my annual car insurance. By evening, as Timmy woke up hungry and we shared a tray of mashed potatoes that he declared tasted like library paste, the backlash started rolling in via a flurry of texts, Lisa first, her messages a whirlwind of emojis I ignored and please laced with that dramatic flair she'd honed since high school theater, insisting the dress money was crucial for more than just lace and sequins, hinting at some underlying pressure from her fiancé's family expectations that made the whole thing sound like a house of cards teetering on the edge of collapse. Mom followed with voicemails that escalated from wheedling to outright accusations of sabotage, claiming I was tearing the family apart over one missed visit when they'd both been dealing with unavoidable commitments she refused to specify. And though part of me wanted to fire back with details of the empty waiting room and the hours I'd spent alone envisioning worst-case scenarios for Timmy's future, I held off, letting the silence stretch as my own form of retaliation that spoke louder than any argument. Then, cutting through the digital noise like an unexpected ally, came a call from my cousin Jenny, the quiet one from Mom's side who'd always sent birthday cards with cash tucked inside and now offered to bring over casseroles for when we got home. Her voice warm and concerned as she asked about Timmy's recovery and casually mentioned overhearing Mom and Lisa bickering at a family diner the week before about an old debt tied to Dad's estate that supposedly got settled, but apparently lingered like a bad check in the mail. It was the first crack in their narrative, a subtle hint that the wedding dress plea masked something deeper, perhaps financial skeletons rattling in closets I'd long assumed were empty. And as I thanked Jenny profusely before hanging up, a restless energy propelled me to text Mark for confirmation once Timmy drifted off again. But instead of a quick reply, my phone stayed quiet until late that night when I rummaged through a box of Dad's old documents I'd stashed in the hospital bag out of habit, pulling out a faded envelope addressed to all three of us siblings with a postmark from years ago that caught the lamplight just right. Its contents whispering promises of revelations that could either vindicate my actions or drag me into a mess far stickier than frozen funds ever were. That faded envelope from Dad's box felt heavier than it should have in my hand as I sat cross-legged on the hospital room floor late into the night, Timmy's soft breathing the only sound breaking the quiet hum of the air conditioning unit. And I traced the edges with my thumb, debating whether to tear it open right there or wait until morning light made the words less accusatory in the shadows. It was addressed to Mom, Lisa, Mark, and me in Dad's neat block letters, postmarked just months before his heart gave out, and the return address was from some lawyer's office in downtown Cleveland that rang no bells, stirring a curiosity laced with dread because if this held clues to the debt Jenny mentioned, it could rewrite the family history I'd always accepted as just bad luck and worse choices. But sleep won out eventually, fitful and interrupted by nurse checks, and by breakfast the next day, Timmy munching on toast while quizzing me about when we could go home, I'd tucked it away in my purse, figuring I'd deal with it after discharge, which the doctor cleared mid-morning with instructions on pain meds and rest that I nodded through while packing our things with one eye on my phone for any more fallout from the account freeze. The drive back to our little house on Elm Street was tense, Timmy chattering about school friends and missing his video games, but my mind replayed Mom's call and Lisa's texts, the $1 memo probably circulating like a bad joke at their next coffee clutch. And sure enough, as I pulled into the driveway with bags of clean laundry from the hospital, there was Mark's beat-up pickup truck parked crookedly at the curb, his lanky frame leaning against it with a styrofoam cup in hand, looking like he'd driven straight through from Pennsylvania without a pit stop. He straightened up when he saw me, waving awkwardly as Timmy bounded out yelling, "Uncle Mark," and into a hug that made my brother's face light up in genuine relief, a rare crack in his usual stoic trucker facade that almost softened me until I remembered his unanswered voicemail from surgery night. We got Timmy settled inside with cartoons and juice, then stepped out to the back porch where the autumn leaves crunched underfoot and the air carried that crisp bite promising winter soon, and Mark launched into apologies right away, claiming spotty cell service on the road and a deadline haul that kept him tied up, but his eyes flicked away too much for it to land as truth, reminding me of the kid version who'd fib about eating the last cookie to avoid Mom's wrath. I let him talk, sipping from a water bottle to buy time, before laying it out plain, that empty waiting room had carved a hole no excuse could fill, and freezing the accounts was my way of drawing a line because if family meant dipping into shared pots without regard for who filled them, then maybe it was time to empty the pot altogether. He nodded slowly, rubbing his stubbled chin, and admitted the 10,000 plea wasn't just for a dress. Lisa's wedding vendor had hiked prices due to some custom fabric delay, but underneath it all was pressure from an old loan Mom had taken against Dad's life insurance to cover Lisa's community college tuition dropout, a debt that ballooned with interest and now threatened to swallow their credit ratings whole. It painted them in a slightly less villainous light, humanizing the mess with financial desperation I'd tasted myself after the divorce when bills piled up like uninvited guests, but it didn't erase the sting of their absence. And as Mark pulled out his wallet to hand me a couple hundred in cash for Timmy's recovery, I felt a pang of what if, wondering if accepting it meant chipping away at my resolve or just acknowledging that not all neglect came from malice. The conversation shifted when he mentioned rifling through his own box of Dad's stuff last week and finding hints of unequal splits in the will, Mom favoring Lisa with extras to make up for lost time after her teen rebellions, while Mark and I got the scraps, which tied into Jenny's overheard argument and made my blood simmer at the long-festering favoritism that had me playing second fiddle my whole life. With a dry laugh to mask the hurt, because laughing at the absurdity was better than crying over spilled inheritances, I pulled up my phone and showed him Lisa's latest social media post from the bridal shop. Her beaming in a gown that screamed excess while tagging #BlessedDanceDressed, and quipped that if guilt was the new couture, she'd be runway ready by now, watching Mark chuckle uncomfortably as the irony hit him square. It was a small victory, that witty exposure airing a minor lie without full confrontation, but it left me wrestling with a dilemma as we wrapped up. Should I spill these estate beans to Timmy when he asked about the family drama, risking tainting his innocent view of grandparents who sent cards but rarely showed, or keep it buried like Mom had, making me no better than the secret keepers I'd just frozen out? Mark promised to corner Mom and Lisa for a real talk, clapping me on the shoulder before heading to a local motel for the night, and I waved him off feeling a tentative bridge forming, but as the sun dipped low and I turned back inside to check on Timmy, my phone buzzed with an urgent text from an unknown number claiming to be Lisa's fiancé, saying they needed to meet ASAP about a family emergency that went beyond money, the words leaving me staring at the screen in the gathering dusk, heart racing with the fear that whatever surprise waited might shatter the fragile peace I'd clawed back or pull me deeper into the web I'd tried so hard to escape. That text from Lisa's fiancé, Brad, lingered on my phone like an unwelcome guest who wouldn't take the hint to leave. Its words about a family emergency beyond money pulling at the threads of my already frayed nerves as I stood in the kitchen stirring soup for Timmy's dinner, the steam rising in lazy curls that did nothing to warm the chill settling in my bones from the day's revelations with Mark and the envelope still unopened in my purse. Brad, with his slick sales patter and Jimbro build that Lisa fawned over in every photo, wasn't the type to reach out directly unless something big loomed, so I replied cautiously asking for details while plating the meal and calling Timmy to the table, where he dug in with the enthusiasm of a kid rebounding from hospital blandness, chattering about a school project on space exploration that made me smile despite the undercurrent of worry bubbling just beneath the surface. His questions about Uncle Mark's visit were innocent enough, wondering if Grandma and Aunt Lisa would come see his new scar that he proudly lifted his shirt to show like a badge of honor. And I dodged with vague promises of family time soon while inwardly cringing at the lie, because how could I explain to a 12-year-old that the people who should rally around him had prioritized secrets and schemes over his bedside, leaving me to navigate this minefield alone with choices that felt increasingly like walking a tightrope over a pit of regret. Brad's response came as we finished eating, a terse message suggesting we meet at the local coffee shop tomorrow morning to discuss the debt mess in person away from Mom and Lisa's years, hinting that the wedding dress was a smokescreen for a larger tangle involving Mom's gambling slips from the casino downriver that had escalated into threats from collectors who didn't care about family ties or holiday gatherings. It painted a picture grimmer than I'd imagined. Mom not just neglectful but neck-deep in habits Dad had warned her against before his passing, the kind that started with harmless slots and snowballed into borrowing against the house equity we'd all assumed was safe, and suddenly the frozen accounts took on a sharper edge. My impulsive lockout potentially starving off worse predators, but also stranding them in a storm I'd helped brew. Sleep evaded me that night, tossing in the sheets with Timmy's door cracked open to hear his even breaths, my mind replaying scenarios where I unfroze everything and played the hero again, only to end up resenting the cycle that had me bailing out Lisa's follies since she was a teen dropping out of classes for boyfriends and dreams that never panned out. Morning brought the meeting, the coffee shop buzzing with the usual crowd of retirees nursing lattes and young moms herding toddlers, and Brad slid into the booth across from me with a firm handshake that belied the sweat beading on his forehead, launching into the story without preamble about how Lisa had confessed the real pressure behind the 10,000 ask, a payoff to hush up Mom's markers at the poker tables that could derail the wedding if word got out to his conservative parents who valued stability over sob stories. He showed me printouts from some app tracking the debts, numbers climbing like weeds in an untended garden, and pleaded for me to release even a portion of the shared funds as a bridge until they sorted insurance claims from Dad's policy that Mom swore would cover it all, but his earnestness clashed with the memory of their no-show, making me question if this was genuine desperation or just another layer of manipulation designed to tug at my soft spots. As we talked, the door chimed with Mom and Lisa's entrance, their faces a storm cloud of surprise turning to fury when they spotted us, and they marched over with Lisa's heels clicking like accusations on the tile floor. Mom demanding in a hushed hiss what Brad was doing spilling beans without her say-so while Lisa shot me glares that could curdle milk. The confrontation escalated in whispers to avoid drawing stares, Mom insisting the accounts freeze was tantamount to abandonment when they were all in this together against outside threats, but I held my ground with a calm that surprised even me. Pulling out my phone to display a screenshot of the bank statements I'd printed that morning showing irregular withdrawals timed suspiciously with my tough months post-divorce, each one a silent testament to how they'd treated the shared pot like a bottomless well while I filled it drop by drop. With a wry twist to my lips, because injecting a bit of sarcasm was the only way to keep from boiling over, I suggested that if the dress was code for debt cleanup, maybe they should auction off some of Lisa's designer samples on that online marketplace where impulse buyers lurked, watching Lisa's cheeks flush crimson as the public jab landed without me raising my voice, a clever sting that exposed their inconsistencies in a neutral territory where lies couldn't hide behind closed doors. Brad shifted uncomfortably, trying to mediate with promises of repayment plans that sounded as solid as wet paper, but Mom's eyes narrowed with a vow to involve lawyers if I didn't budge, hinting at clauses in Dad's will that could tie up my own assets in the crossfire, leaving me to drive home with a headache pounding and the weight of potential fallout pressing down. Timmy greeted me at the door with a drawing of our family all together under a sunny sky, his crayon lines connecting us in ways reality had long frayed, and as I hugged him tight while fighting back the urge to unload the afternoon's chaos, I realized withholding these tangled truths from him might protect his world, but also isolated me further, making my vengeful stands feel selfish in the quiet moments when doubt whispered that perhaps cutting them off entirely was the real cruelty, especially if the debts dragged innocence like Brad into the abyss. The mail arrived later that afternoon with a thick envelope from a law firm in the city, its official seal unbroken and contents unknown, but the return address matching the one on Dad's old letter sent a jolt through me as I held it up to the light. The shadow of impending legal threats looming larger than any frozen account ever could, forcing me to confront whether my next move would salvage fragments of family or shatter them beyond repair. The thick envelope from the law firm mocked me from the kitchen counter all evening, its crisp paper catching the glow of the overhead light as I helped Timmy with his homework at the table, his pencil scratching out math problems while he peppered me with questions about the stars that made the tangled family web feel distant for a few precious minutes, but the weight of it pulled my thoughts back like an anchor, reminding me that whatever legal storm brewed inside could upend the fragile stability I'd fought to maintain since the divorce turned our lives into a solo act. Timmy headed to bed early, still a bit wobbly from recovery, but insisting on reading his comic book under the covers, and once the house fell quiet with only the hum of the fridge to keep me company, I sliced it open with a letter opener that Dad had given me years ago, the irony not lost as the documents spilled out in a neat stack, each page stamped with official seals that screamed finality. It was a formal notice. From the estate attorney handling Dad's affairs, citing joint account disputes, and demanding I unfreeze the funds immediately to cover outstanding obligations tied to the will. But buried in the fine print were the bombshells. Evidence of Mom altering beneficiary forms post-Dad's death to funnel more toward Lisa's education and support, siphoning portions meant for Mark and me into accounts that matched the gambling debts Brad had described, turning what I'd thought was simple favoritism into outright embezzlement that could land her in hot water if reported. My hands trembled as I read on, piecing together how the $10,000 plea was a desperate Hail Mary to plug holes before auditors caught wind, the surgery no-show perhaps a symptom of her spiraling panic rather than pure neglect. Though it didn't soften the blow of those empty chairs or excuse Lisa's complicity in covering for her with wedding distractions. Calling Mark Wright then felt like the only lifeline, his voice groggy from whatever motel he was crashing in but sharpening as I summarized the papers, and he confirmed he'd suspected as much after digging into his own copies, admitting he'd stayed silent to avoid rocking the boat for Timmy's sake, but now saw my freeze as the way-up call we all needed, even if it meant facing the fallout together or apart. We talked strategy late into the night, his trucker pragmatism clashing with my raw hurt, and by the time we hung up, a plan crystallized, not rushing to cops or courts, but a measured response that would force accountability without total destruction. Because despite the rage, blood ties tugged at the edges of my resolve, making me question if exposing it all would heal the rifts or widen them into chasms Timmy might never cross. The next morning brought the confrontation I'd half-dreaded, Mom and Lisa arriving unannounced with Brad in tow, their SUV pulling up as I sipped coffee on the front steps watching leaves skitter across the lawn, the autumn chill mirroring the frost between us as they approached with faces set in determination, Mom clutching a folder of her own that she thrust forward claiming it proved the changes were Dad's idea to protect Lisa from hard choices. We moved inside to the living room, Timmy at a friend's house for the morning thank goodness, and the air thickened with accusations, Lisa tearfully defending the diversions as loans she'd repay post-wedding, Brad nodding supportively while avoiding my eyes. But Mom's voice cracked when pressed on the forgeries, admitting the gambling had started as a way to cope after Dad, but snowballed into borrowing from the estate to keep up appearances for Lisa's sake, the words hanging heavy like smoke from a fire we'd all ignored. It was the closest to truth they'd come, a partial confession that humanized their betrayals, but amplified my isolation, because even now, apologies felt conditional on me unlocking the accounts, turning my pain into leverage rather than a bridge to mend what broke during Timmy's surgery. With a steadying breath, I laid out the attorney documents on the coffee table like cards in a high-stakes game, highlighting the discrepancies in red pen notes I'd jotted overnight, and as their expressions shifted from defiance to dawning horror, I couldn't resist a touch of wry humor to cut the tension, quipping that if family heirlooms included bad decisions, we'd all be millionaires and regrets by now, the line landing with awkward silence that spoke volumes. For my final play, I handed over a slim envelope of my own, containing a one-page summary of the evidence annotated with polite but pointed questions about the no-show and a check for exactly $100 memoed for therapy, yours, not mine. A witty capstone to the revenge arc that stung without venom, leaving them to stew in the mirror I'd held up while I retained control of the narrative. They left shortly after, murmurs of consulting their own lawyer trailing behind, and the house echoed emptier than before, but Jenny's afternoon visit with homemade lasagna brought a sliver of warmth, her quiet listening as I vented confirming not all Jenkins' blood ran cold, though she hinted at Mom's recent doctor's visits for something vague like fatigue that might explain the deeper withdrawals. Days passed in a standoff, texts tapering to silence as the accounts remained frozen and wedding plans apparently stalled, but one evening as Timmy and I baked cookies, flour dusting the counters in a rare moment of normalcy, my phone rang with Mom's number. Her voice stripped bare without the demands, confessing a health scare she'd hidden to not burden me further during Timmy's crisis, a pancreatic shadow from scans that tied into the stress eating her alive. It hung there, an unanswered plea wrapped in vulnerability that cracked my armor just enough to wonder if the deaths and neglect stemmed from her own unraveling rather than malice. But as the call ended, abruptly with her hanging up, I set the phone down and pulled Timmy into a flowery hug, the ambiguity settling like dusk over our fractured circle. Now, with the legal papers filed away and Timmy's laughter filling the rooms more each day, I grapple with whether to thaw the freeze and forgive the unforgivable, or let the bonds shatter completely, leaving us all to ponder if some families are worth the salvage or better left as lessons in standing alone, the questions lingering without easy answers in the quiet aftermath.